So we've got the ProForm 505 CST Treadmill here. We can see that it's got a decent number of reviews overall, which can help us out in terms of making the potential for a final purchase decision. So outside of that, let's look through some of the listing here. Let's just look at the picture itself first. We do not really have any high-level features that are shown or displayed in the picture itself, other than we can see that it's got a decent sized screen on it in terms of an additional monitor that is available. That with this one they are offering an iFit component to it, so an exercise program that is a little bit more than the scope of this video, but it can offer you some additional bonuses in terms of being able to have some workout versatility. And then you've actually got the console display that is a little bit more blue, and you can kind of see that underneath of the wording of the ProForm logo. It looks like from the photo, if we actually get into the console view, you can see that you've got some quick press buttons, so it looks like you can both adjust speed and then adjust incline with some quick key presses. The console itself, we're just generally trying to look at the plastic components, what the plastic actually looks like. Does it have kind of like a cheaper or a thinner feel or look to it? And overall, it's a fairly basic looking console, which for fitness professionals like us, we generally like to see that, because some of the issues that end up happening with a console that tends to be a little bit too technically savvy is that it often has connectivity issues where the home internet might not necessarily like what is being provided back and forth between the two connections, between the wireless connection in the actual console and then the wireless connection that is coming from your router. So that is one thing to kind of factor in, is that the more technology that is involved with the treadmill, the more you are going to end up with some sort of an issue, or at the very best case, you will end up with something that might work, but you're going to have several updates, just like it is with your phone, where you've got to update that every so often. But we've got a fairly simple display here, so that will be something that generally with the backlit blue portion of the console, that's something that you'll have to determine whether or not that visibility is ideal for you. But overall, it's got a fairly decent setup and a fairly decent look. With looking at the treadmill now, one of the other things that we really want to focus on and look at is just how much plastic is on the treadmill itself, and what does that plastic look like. Generally, we've got enough experience with plastics to be able to say whether or not that has a sleek look to it, or potentially a thinner, cheaper look to it. And overall here, it kind of has the look that this might be a little bit of a thinner style plastic, so you may get a little bit more creaks in this treadmill when you're actually stepping on it because of that style of plastic. The other thing that we can see here is the actual cushioning. So that is something it looks like it's more of a shock style cushion rather than a heavy dense rubber, which dense rubber tends to be a little bit more favorable because it offers the most consistent feedback mechanism, whereas with a spring style system that has the tendency to wear out a bit faster than something that is more compact rubber. And then some of the other features that we're looking at are the uprights, which these tend to be a little bit thinner looking, and both on the length of them in terms of how deep they are, and then overall with the height of the treadmill, that is going to be fairly synonymous with most of them. It appears that with this woman, if she's actually running on the treadmill, which this could be a photoshopped image, though it doesn't look like a photoshopped image, this could be the average step-on height and the average step-on height, so that the console is not too high up and it's not too low in terms of having an issue if you were to have a TV mounted somewhere in this room. But then it does look like they went with some sort of a plastic overlay piece, or a plastic arm piece that would then stick over the tube style steel that is going to be underneath this handrail here. And something that can be problematic with that is that if you grip on these more often, what ends up happening is that the screw that is generally underneath here, there's usually 3 or 4 screws underneath here, those can start to wiggle themselves free, and this can become a little bit more sloppy. So if you are someone that uses these handrails more often, that could be a problem down the road, though with the $5.99 price point, that is not too bad. The next piece here is going to be, we can go back to the folding mechanism, because this treadmill does fold, and we can see that based on this spring style clip here. If this is off-centered any bit, it is going to be very difficult to be able to lock this actually in place. And when you are moving these treadmills, that is another thing that can become problematic. There are other ones that will actually have a shock style mechanism underneath that will, the shock mechanism will actually lock in place. Those are ones that are a little bit more preferable for us just because they tend to be a little bit more durable, and then you don't have an issue where this spring in here or this little bolt mechanism actually breaks or wears down, and then you've got a problem with being able to fold the treadmill. So now we're going to go a little bit further into this one and look at the actual some of the high level specifics of the treadmill itself. So we've got a 2.5 horsepower CHP, so continuous horsepower motor, which is not too bad for a treadmill that is under $1,000. Generally, a treadmill that is going to be producing a maximum speed of 10 miles an hour, that is going to be a motor that is pretty much expected. Anything more than that might just be too much motor for this size of a treadmill. Though, if you're going to be someone that is running on a treadmill and you're someone that is, say, 150 pounds or more, you're going to want something that is actually going to be creeping up more towards that 3 horsepower rather than 2.5, just because as the motor heats up, that's going to be producing some issues for you for the long run just because of how much horsepower it's producing. You're looking at revolutions per minute, and we're starting to get a little bit more than the scope of this video, but for the general purposes, you'd want to get something that's a little bit closer to the 3 horsepower, especially if you're going to be someone that is running on it. But for 2.5 horsepower, it is not much. There's not much more expected than a 10 mile per hour max speed. But for someone that is, again, looking to run on a treadmill, that is another point down, just because you might not be able to do these intense sprint intervals. You'd probably be able to get up to a decent level of a sprint interval, but that is something where, again, something to factor in. And then you might want to actually go test and see what you do your sprint intervals at. If you are someone that may somehow eclipse that 10 mile per hour marker, then that is something that this treadmill is likely not to work for you, or at least consistently for you. The next big piece will be that for those that are 5'8" or taller, you're going to want something that has a track length, so a running room. That is generally what this is telling you. The treadmill belt is the actual length and width, which in this case it's showing you the width first, so 20 inches wide and 55 inches long. That's something that you want to make sure that, given how most people run, 20 inches is going to be about enough. Commercial treadmills tend to be something that is around 22 inches, so a little bit more room for a commercial treadmill. But if you were to get under 18 inches for the track width, that's something that your stance would have to be fairly narrow when you're running, and you do not have a lot of room for sway in the event that you start to run longer distances, and as you fatigue, people tend to start to shift from side to side a little bit more. And then the track length is another one that, given that it's 55 inches, you may be running up closer to the hood portion of the treadmill. So this front portion here is the hood. That's something that can be problematic because you cannot stray further back from the treadmill, because what ends up happening is that as the footfall happens, you might end up stepping right towards the rear end of this and then starting to clip on that roller and feel like you're running on a ledge, which is also a non-comforting piece. The next big piece here is we can look at user capacity. So this has a user capacity of 325 pounds. So that is going to be something that actually tells you that the treadmill has a decent build quality to it, because it can withstand a decent sized user. A lot of home treadmills will start to have this weight capacity component to it, to where it's around 325 pounds. If the treadmill says it's somewhere around 225 to 250, that would probably be something that is fairly concerning as well. I would probably forego that treadmill. This just again tells you that it's been tested by a decent sized user, and there's several factors that go into that. In terms of the rollers, this has balanced rollers on it. They are a little bit smaller in size, but given the size of the treadmill overall, you've got a decent level of tension here. If we were to get to around 1.5 inches or less with these rollers, that is a very thin roller that has to keep a solid amount of tension on the actual treadmill belt. That can become problematic, and those can wear faster because you've got a thinner roller that still has to roll around in a revolution per minute as the treadmill belt is moving. So that is another thing to factor in when it comes to the treadmill. So you really want to make sure that the roller size is somewhere around 2 inches. The next piece that we can see is the warranty, which is also something that at this price point of $599 is pretty common, where you've got somewhere around lifetime on the frame, somewhere around lifetime on the motor. 25 years is pretty much going to be the lifetime of the treadmill itself, and usually treadmills are going to be lasting somewhere around 8 to 15 years depending on the level of care and maintenance in the treadmill. And then 1 year on parts and labor is something that, as this treadmill increases in price, you will also then see the parts portion will increase by about a year, maybe 2. The labor portion generally stays somewhere between 6 months to 2 years, but again, at this $599 price point, that is a very solid warranty. And then it looks like this comes with a little bit of a bonus of their iFit. So you've got a 30-day free membership to try out iFit, and that's something where at least you get the experience to see whether or not that's going to work for you, so that's a nice little bonus. And then from there, one of the other pieces that we want to then look at is, you can see some of these key components here which start to bring things a little bit more into the picture. You've got top level specs here. You can kind of see individual components. They're really highlighting the 10% quick incline from those buttons, the size of the motor, and then the actual treadmill belt size. Now, one of the pieces that we're looking for here is the weight of the product itself. Most of these products come from overseas, so that is something that can have a major factor in terms of what the treadmill is actually built from. This actually says 203 pounds, and given that most of the times when it comes to a treadmill like this, they're having to factor in that into the shipping cost, both from overseas, where most of these come from, and then when they ship that to you, because Amazon has shipping policies, it will then ask the shipper, so the person selling this treadmill, what the product weight is, so that they can put that in the listing. And generally they're looking at shipped weight. So you can see down here, shipped weight. That is going to tell you that, one, you've got a solid treadmill, because it's somewhere around 200 pounds. If a treadmill is going to weigh less than 150 pounds, that is another problem point that you really want to make sure that you're looking out for, in terms of the treadmill likely not being built from all that many metal components. There's going to be a hefty amount of plastic on a treadmill that is built well enough that is also going to be something that is still somehow under 150 pounds. So you're going to want to be having something that is above 150 pounds. It is nice to see that this one is at 203 pounds, so that is still a safe bet in terms of this having a solid motor, solid rollers, a decent deck surface, and then decent metal components for the uprights and the actual frame of the treadmill itself. And then the final thing that is really also nice about this is you can kind of start to look through some of the questions that were answered. And then what I like to do in terms of making sure that if a generic product that I am looking for is still on the fence for me, I like to go from 5-star reviews and see what people are generally saying. And this one looks like it's got a pretty solid update, and he or she has been updating that as time has progressed. And then you can kind of see that there's a good balance. So we've got the majority of these reviews, 47% of the reviews listed are 5-star reviews, a decent number are 4-star, and then the next big number is that 1-star. So we go from 5-star reviews, see what those people are saying, and then see if we can find that maybe they've been somehow offered incentives to be able to give those reviews. That's another big component that can happen with reviews, especially as products come out. People get big discounts to be able to offer their review in exchange for the fact that the listing has a lot of reviews. So we want to kind of sift through those to make sure that we're not getting a lot of fluff, and then we'll go into the 1-star reviews to see if there's some consistencies here. If you've got some consistencies with 1-star reviews, maybe with how the product is handled, that might be a component to it, and the deliverers are having an issue with maintaining a good level of control of that product. So these are things that might not necessarily be on the manufacturer, but if it's still not able to be handled well, then the packaging definitely needs to make sure that it's withstanding that transit. So that is another thing that good manufacturers will make sure that they really have great care in terms of how well that treadmill is packaged so that it can get to you safely. But trying to sift through the 1-star reviews to see if there's some consistencies. Maybe it's consistent that the treadmill only lasted for a few months after they purchased it, or there's a consistency with some sort of an issue where it was DOA and it did not really work great out of the box. So outside of that, I do hope that you actually enjoyed this type of review.